Okay, so these are the radiators. The part is cardboard, and then the other part is just paper. So I put those on off camera. Um, then that is the outside edging that goes everywhere, and that where I'm pointing my fingers where a little radiator cap is going to be made. And there's the front and the back of the radiator. That little piece is supposed to be in the center. So what I did was draw a little line, a little dot right there, which will allow me to get these things absolutely, supposedly, centered. So I put a little glue on there, and then I just start by adding it to that top curved piece, letting it dry a little bit, and you just slowly work your way around, adding a little glue as you go. And it fit pretty well, although at the very end, I did have about a 1/8 inch gap at the very bottom. But I do think it's supposed to be on the inside. I don't think that it's supposed to sit proud, so I'm not sure why I have that extra piece on there. So to me, that outside copper colored piece needs to be a little bit longer than it is. But in any event, it was easy to fix. It's not a big deal. So you can see I'm just putting this on carefully, very quickly, just making sure I put a little glue and work my way around. Works very well. And you end up then with the radiator edging all the way around, and then all you need to do is put in the opposite side of the radiator, the back or the front, depending where you start. So what I did was put a little glue on the edge, on one edge, and I slid it in place so that it's flush against that edge, and started gluing. And then I took my tweezers and sort of dragged around the edge to sort of open up the edging so I could push down. See, I'm pushing down the radiator a little bit so it'll fit, it'll click into place. And I opened up a little bit back again, and now I'm adding a little bit of glue. And then that slides in. You just want to make sure you don't want to slide it in too far. You want it to be flush, of course, with the edge. And then once that's in there and you got the little glue, you just sort of slide that little guy into place like this. Boom. And there it is. And I push down on one side to make sure it's kind of flat. Just making sure everything is flush with either side. So there is the part of the radiator. It looks pretty good. Although that part went off course, I don't know why. It ends up not mattering. I don't know how I got it off. But anyway, that's okay. Now you put the front and the backing on. So I'll put a little glue around the outside edge all the way around, top, bottom, sides. And grab my tweezers and just carefully drop them on there. Drop it on there. Make sure you don't have any wrinkles or little hills or valleys. And just make sure it's all tight. Do the same thing to the opposite side. And very easy. And then the basic part of the radiator is completed. Looks good. There, I'm putting around the other side. And notice that black dot on the top, and there's one near the bottom. That means that's going to be the portion that faces the engine, because that's where a couple of radiator hoses are going to go. There, I just kind of give it a little pressure to make sure it's nice and solid. Squidgy off some of the extra glue that comes out. And there's your radiator. Very simple. Yep, that's a bottom and a top radiator hose. Looks good. Now, putting these little stands, there's little stands that are basically little rectangular pieces of black paper that are folded in a couple places, and they make like a U, like an off-center U. And you glue one part to the side, and then the other part, while I'm pushing down on that side and make sure it glues, this other piece is kind of looped up around and glued to the base. Oh, look, it flies upside down. That's just to show you I put the engine on and it doesn't fall off. I was very pleased with that. So now, this radiator, those parts are going to face towards the engine, and they're going to connect to that top piece there, that radiator piece. Now, put the little radiator cap on. So I used my quilling tool, and I rolled this piece of paper around just to be different. I could have just used a little piece of wire too and done it against my finger or something. But the quilling tool worked fine for this. Just rolled it around, and then you that way it starts off the twist, and there it is. and then you play around with it and make sure that it's nice and circular. And in my case, I've added a little glue, and I'm just trying to squeeze it together, and there it is. So next step is to just put on the other top cap piece, which fits just fine. Just plop that on there. So now you got like a double layer, and it looks nice. And all you do is you make sure it's straight. You got to sort of play around and make sure that it is even. And now you just put the cap on the top of the radiator. Now because I put on that outside edge wrong, I couldn't use the little marking for a place to put it. But you just did it by eye. And I'm just moving this thing around, making sure it's centered, both from the face and also from the edge, and make sure it's not crooked. And when that dries, you end up with a nice little radiator ready to install. Looks just fine, and it'll look really good when it's on the airplane. It's gonna, again, gussy it up a little bit. Nothing like some streamlining. So it's gonna, with those little feet, I had to put a couple little pieces of cardboard on there to make it a little bit taller, because it has to fit over that crank up there. And by doing that, it fits over it and it doesn't look silly. So that's going to be perfect, because I want that crank to fit out, because I do want to put the little handle on it. So I put a little glue on the feet, and then I drop it right over. I've looked at the drawings and pictures to see where the radiator is supposed to sit, and it sits pretty dang close up to that front edge. A little variation depending on pictures, but pretty much on top of the front end of the engine holders. Now I'm trying to figure out part of one of the lower radiator hoses. I'm just kind of checking it and cutting it and making sure that it fits. It's a piece of fuse wire, 1mm fuse wire. And so I'm going to attach it down there to the engine, and it's going to be forward on that back side. So now I add a little glue. And you can see I put that right on the edge right there, and then put the other side right into the back of the engine. It takes a couple times to make sure it works. You got to make sure that the radiator isn't pushed forward. It has to be straight. It looks good though. And I started with just a little white glue just as a way to tack it on. Later on I come back and hit it with a little super glue just to make sure that it's, yeah, here I'm hitting it with a little super glue just to make sure that it really is solid. And then I zip kicked it to make sure that it's on there, because if there's a little difference or a little questionable bend in that fuse wire, you can go back with some tweezers and kind of tweak it and get it just right. But there's the lower radiator hose in. Looks pretty good, not bad at all. Now there's a top radiator hose that goes over the top of the engine, so I got to fabricate that next. It turned out to be more difficult than I thought, but and here I am just adjusting. See, you can kind of tweak things because it's glued on either end, and that fuse wire is really bendy. So it makes for a very handy way to move things around. It's really nice stuff to work with. And it can be painted or left alone. It'll look just great. So it's coming along. Now, top radiator components. There's a piece of 1/16 aluminum tubing I use for the top. These are end caps that are stretched sprue that are kind of conical. And then I got some curved, C-shaped fuse wire that's going to go on each end to attach to the engines, to that top piece. So this is just putting on the little tapered flanges that go on the ends. Got to do that to both sides. It's not just apparently just a tube. It actually has it has like a cone on each end that goes down and fits into a smaller, I guess, diameter hose of some kind. So putting that on with some super glue, making sure it looks good. Put one on the other side. So there I am, dropping it into a blob of super glue and putting it on the opposite side, making sure it is going to go in there and look okay. Again, making sure things are straight, making sure they're true. If I was really crazy, I would have taken this and sanded it and shaped it and did some more filling on it so you wouldn't see any edges, but I wasn't worried. So there's one of the C pieces going on, and those have been sort of done by eye, wrapped around a handle to make a nice curve, and there has to be one on each end glued in ultimately. because what this radiator hose does is actually it's sort of suspended above the engine, from what I can see. So this is just trying to get that piece on carefully. And you can see I was having a little bit of problem gluing it to my finger rather than the piece. But I finally got it on. A little zip kicker helps. And another one goes on the other side, but for testing purposes, it's going to see attached to that coppery piece that we put on there and sit like that. So that's what it's going to end up looking like. So here I'm putting on the other side. I've kind of tried to make measurements as to how that's going to look. So I'm putting on the other sort of C-shaped piece of fuse wire. It's a slightly different shape than the other one in terms of length because it attaches to a different location. So they had to get the geometry right. And what I ended up trying to do basically was I had better luck if I used the white glue. And if I just put that on either side, believe it or not, it's stuck. Now this is after a lot of test fitting. But you have to sit there and kind of, you can see it doesn't glue immediately because it's that white glue and you're gluing metal onto these other pieces. So it's not the best way to do it, but I tried it with super glue and I just messed up every time. So here I'm just kind of holding them all in different places so it's kind of drying in a suspended fashion. You can see that loop down there at the base, right behind the radiator. That's the part that's drying. I'm just trying to make sure that it's straight. And once it dries enough, then I put a little super glue on the ends to sort of shore it up. So there it is done. And then I decided to paint it silver. So I just used some silver paint to paint everything. In retrospect, the silver is way too gaudy. So I'm going to probably go back and kind of tone down the silver. Because to me it just looks really, I don't know, it just looks like a piece of cheap jewelry. So I'm going to probably paint it like a lighter gray or something. When you see it next, maybe you'll see it painted a little bit different color. Just to me, this was too shiny and too bright. Then I put little black accents on the ends where there would be little hose clamps on a couple of places just to give a little extra detail. Those brushes, again, are worth their weight in gold. They work really well. I really like them. So again, you have to spend money on some of those Winsor Newton skinny brushes. Do it. So there it is. And you can see it looks kind of cool. Now it's all officially done. An oil tank has to go in here sometime, but I'm going to wait to put the top center section on before I do that. But the engine's officially done, and the radiators are connected to it. Looks like a functional engine. Put a prop on there, swing it through. I bet you she'd fire up. Not a waste of time at all.